At 79, just months before the end of his life, Dick Butkus allowed a rare moment of vulnerability. The man who built an entire mythology out of grit pain and unflinching violence finally spoke about the shadows that had followed him long after the collisions stopped. For decades, Chicago celebrated him as the embodiment of fear. Offenses trembled when they saw number 51 plant his feet in the mud. Quarterbacks changed plays, running backs shortened strides. Even teammates whispered that Butkus did not merely tackle, he destroyed. But behind that legendary brutality lived 5 truths he kept buried. Truths that shaped his career and haunted his final years. Truths tied to broken bones, rivalries soaked in resentment, and the constant accusation that he had crossed a line between toughness and cruelty. The public saw a monster built for Sundays, but his closest circle knew he carried doubts about what the violence had taken from him. They knew he kept a mental list of the men who provoked him to the edge. They knew the league tried to tame him, even as it used his image to sell a more dangerous style of football. This is the story of the fear Chicago adored, and the cost Dick Butkus never fully escaped. These are the 5 hidden truths that defined the most terrifying linebacker of football's golden age. And the question that follows is simple. How much of his legend was carved by dominance, and how much was carved by wounds he never truly healed? Dick Butkus was born into the hard edges of Chicago's South Side, a place where toughness was not admired but required. Long before he terrorized the NFL, he learned to face the world with clenched fists and a sharpened will. By the time he arrived at Illinois, coaches already spoke about him with a kind of awe. He moved with the weight of a lineman and the instincts of a hunter. When the Chicago Bears drafted him in the mid-1960s, the city embraced him instantly. They thought they were getting a linebacker. What they received instead was a force of nature. On the field, Butkus played like a man chasing something no one else could see. He attacked running lanes with no hesitation. He closed on quarterbacks with a violence that felt personal. His tackles were not simply stops. They were statements that echoed through the stadium. Fans swore they could feel the air change when he entered a play. Broadcasters created a new vocabulary around him. They said he stalked runners. They said he punished offenses. Some said he looked as if he were trying to break the game itself. But behind the cheers lived a more complicated truth. Butkus understood that his style of play demanded a price. Every violent collision left its mark. His knees deteriorated, his shoulders stiffened, his back never loosened. Opponents accused him of going too far, of ripping at ankles, twisting bodies under piles, and hitting past the whistle. Butkus dismissed most of those claims, yet he could not deny that the line between legal aggression and outright harm often blurred in the chaos of the era. The Bears relied on him to define their identity. Chicago wanted a hero who reflected the city's rough history and uncompromising nature. Butkus did more than embody that myth. He expanded it. He became the avatar of old-school football, a symbol of the league's most violent chapter. Yet the role came with pressure. When you are known as the most feared man in the sport, you are expected to live up to that title every single Sunday. For Butkus, that expectation created a tension he rarely discussed. The public wanted brutality. The league wanted marketable chaos. His coaches wanted dominance. His body wanted rest. By the end of his career, the injuries that defined his legend also defined his downfall. He left the game, limping, frustrated, and questioning whether the violence he delivered was worth the violence he absorbed. Still, Chicago never stopped seeing him as their eternal guardian, a figure carved from concrete carrying both the pride and the darkness of a city built on hard truths. Number 5 was a rivalry born from pride, frustration, and the shifting violence of the 1960s. The name Ray Nitschke carried weight in Green Bay. He was the anchor of Vince Lombardi's defense, a linebacker forged in discipline and cold winters. On paper, he and Dick Butkus should have been mirrors of each other. Both were fierce. Both were feared. Both defined their cities. Yet every time Chicago faced Green Bay, the collision between these two men became something far deeper than a divisional matchup. It became a test of identity. Their clash began the moment Butkus entered the league. Green Bay saw him as the new challenger, the young force trying to steal their crown. Chicago believed he was the linebacker who would finally break the Packers' dominance. Nitschke had spent years building his reputation through control and structured rage. Butkus emerged with raw fire, a style that felt unpredictable. Coaches on both sides whispered that their meeting was inevitable. They knew two men with the same hunger could not share the same field without leaving scars. The roots of their tension grew during a cold afternoon at Lambeau. Chicago arrived with hope. Green Bay arrived with expectation. Early in the game, a running back slipped into the middle. Nitschke stepped into the lane. Butkus closed from behind. The collision sent the runner collapsing between them. Tempers rose, helmets rattled, words were exchanged that only players close enough to smell sweat and mud could hear. For the rest of that game, neither man cared about the final score. Each hit became a message. Each shove became a warning. Broadcasters pretended to analyze strategy, but the truth was simpler. Two legends were fighting for territory. Their next meeting escalated the tension. Nitschke delivered a late shove after a whistle. Butkus responded by driving him backward during a pile, pushing until both men toppled into the turf. The crowd erupted. Officials struggled to separate them. Years later, teammates said they had never seen Butkus glare at another player the way he glared at Nitschke that afternoon. It was not hatred. It was something colder, recognition. He had finally met someone who refused to be intimidated. The defining moment arrived in a brutal contest at Wrigley Field. Chicago trailed. Green Bay marched. Tension filled every snap. Late in the game, Nitschke stepped into coverage, searching for a short pass. Butkus read the quarterback broke on the ball and intercepted it with a burst of speed the Packers did not expect. As he returned the ball up the sideline, Nitschke launched himself into the tackle. The hit echoed against the brick walls. Butkus went down. Players crashed around them. Amid the chaos, he rose first. He stood over Nitschke, fists clenched, breathing hard enough for cameras to capture steam escape from his helmet. It became one of the most iconic images of the era. Fear staring down. Defiance. After that afternoon, Chicago newspapers framed their rivalry as a battle between cities. Green Bay carried tradition. Chicago carried anger. Each meeting became a story shaped by their collisions. Butkus never admitted he disliked Nitschke. In fact, he respected him. Yet respect did not erase what happened on those Sundays. Their encounters left bruises that lasted weeks. Their fights became memories retold for decades. Butkus never forgot those games. Whenever people asked which opponent pushed him to his limit, he paused before answering. The rivalry with Ray Nitschke remained the reminder that even the most feared man in football still found someone capable of striking back. Number 4 was a clash built not on personal hatred, but on a long string of collisions that slowly turned professional rivalry into something darker. The name, Larry Csonka, carried its own mythology. Miami's powerhouse fullback, carved from muscle and stubbornness, was everything a defense dreaded in the early 1970s. He did not dodge tacklers. He ran through them. And when Miami met Chicago, he found in Dick Butkus the immovable object he had always wanted to test. Their tension began with a simple truth. Csonka refused to back down. Butkus refused to give ground. Every run up the middle became a confrontation. Csonka lowered his shoulder. Butkus met him with a thud that sounded like two trees colliding. Early in their first meeting, Csonka delivered a hit that bent Butkus backward. Teammates later said it was one of the few moments they saw surprise in his eyes. But surprise quickly turned into fury. Miami's coaches understood the danger. They told Csonka to stay low to protect the ball, to avoid letting Butkus dictate the tempo. But Chicago's sideline gave a different order. They told Butkus to punish every inch Miami tried to gain. The middle of the field became a battlefield no one else wanted to enter. Even referees kept distance from the pile. The rivalry changed during a pivotal play in a tight game. Miami ran a simple dive. Schonka took the handoff and burst toward the gap. Butkus met him head-on. The impact was so violent that players on both sides stopped for a heartbeat, unsure who had won. When the dust settled, Schonka pushed forward for extra yards. Butkus, furious, tore at the ball at the arms at anything he could grip. When the whistle blew, he continued dragging Schonka backward until 3 Dolphins shoved him off. Flags flew. Sidelines erupted. From that moment, the matchup between Butkus and Schonka stopped being football. It became a challenge neither man wanted to lose. Their most iconic clash came during a nationally televised game when Miami attempted to set the tone early. On the second drive, Schonka blasted into the line. Butkus read the play instantly and struck him with a hit so clean and violent that the sound carried through the broadcast microphones. Schonka stumbled. For the first and only time in their meetings, he reached for the turf to steady himself. But no one missed what happened next. He got up smiling, a wide, defiant smile, a message that he was still standing. Butkus never forgot that smile. Teammates said it irritated him more than any cheap shot. It told him he had given everything in that moment, and Schonka had embraced it. From then on, Butkus attacked each run with renewed intensity. Schonka met him with equal force. Neither man spoke much about the other in interviews, but both carried bruises from those games long after the season ended. Their rivalry represented the era's purest violence. No words, no theatrics, just impact after impact, 2 men testing the limits of bone and muscle. Years later, Schonka admitted that Butkus was the only defender who made him reconsider running straight ahead. But he never stopped. Butkus respected Schonka, but he never forgave the pain those collisions left behind. Every time someone mentioned the Dolphins, he felt the echoes of those Sundays when 2 Titans refused to yield. Number 3 was not a feud born from equal strength. It came from resentment. From the feeling that one man had taken something from Dick Butkus that could never be returned. The name Joe Cap still divides old NFL fans. To some, he was the embodiment of toughness, the quarterback who played like a linebacker. To Butkus, he was the opponent whose chaotic bruising style crossed lines that even the brutal game of the 1960s struggled to contain. Their tension began the first time Chicago met Minnesota with Cap under center. Most quarterbacks feared Butkus. They avoided his zone. They slid early. They threw the ball away rather than take the hit. Cap did the opposite. He invited contact. He charged forward. He threw himself into defenders with the reckless abandon of someone fighting for survival. Butkus saw it as disrespect. Quarterbacks were supposed to be targets, not aggressors. But Cap was not playing the same game as everyone else. The first major spark came on a broken play. Cap scrambled, right-tucked the ball, and turned upfield. Butkus closed from the middle, ready to deliver a hit that would end the drive. Instead of sliding, Cap lowered his shoulder and crashed into him. The two collided in a spray of mud and sweat. Butkus rolled over, stunned for a moment. Teammates rushed in expecting a fight. Cap simply walked back to the huddle. He had just challenged the most feared man in football and acted as if it were nothing. From that moment, their rivalry escalated. Butkus targeted Cap every chance he got. Late hits, crushing tackles, strips at the end of plays. Minnesota's sideline accused him of taking shots that bordered on dangerous. Chicago responded by saying Cap deserved every one of them for playing the game like a battering ram. The league watched closely. Officials warned both teams before every matchup. The defining moment came during a nationally televised showdown for divisional control. Early in the third quarter, Cap attempted a quarterback sneak. Butkus anticipated it. He launched himself over the pile, crashing directly into Cap's helmet. The hit sent shock through the stadium. Cap stayed down longer than usual. Trainers ran in. Cameras focused on Butkus, who stood over the pile with a stare that could have cut through concrete. Minnesota's players swarmed, shoving and shouting. The game nearly erupted into a full brawl. When Cap finally rose wobbly but determined, he looked straight at Butkus. No words, just the fire of a man who refused to be broken. For Butkus, that moment became a symbol of everything he disliked about Cap. The quarterback would not quit. He would not play by the unspoken rules. He turned every game into a street fight. In later interviews, Cap acknowledged Butkus as the hardest hitter he ever faced, but he also said he never feared him. That statement reached Chicago quickly. Teammates said Butkus listened without expression, but his silence told the truth. He did not forget insults. Joe Cap was not the most talented quarterback Butkus ever faced, but he was the one who challenged him directly, physically, defiantly. And Butkus carried that memory with him long after both men left the field. Number 2 was a rivalry born not from violence alone, but from betrayal. Among all the men Dick Butkus collided with during his career, no name cut deeper than George Halas. He was not an opponent on the field. He was not a rival linebacker or a punishing fullback. He was the owner of the Chicago Bears, the man who had built the franchise's mythology and who was supposed to protect its legends. For Butkus, Halas became the embodiment of a truth he never admitted publicly. Sometimes the greatest wounds do not come from hits. They come from the people you trust. Their relationship began with admiration. Butkus grew up in Chicago. Halas was already a titan. To play for the Bears meant playing for the man who shaped the league itself. When Chicago drafted Butkus, Halas spoke of him with pride. He saw in the young linebacker a return to the rugged identity the city loved. Butkus believed him. For years he played with broken bones, torn knees, and shoulders that screamed every morning. He expected loyalty in return, but the mid-1970s changed everything. Butkus's knees deteriorated. He needed surgery. Team doctors told him he could keep playing. His injuries were painful but manageable. He trusted them. He trusted the organization. And each Sunday he pushed himself through agony, believing the Bears valued him as much as the city did. The truth arrived too late. Independent specialists later told him his knee was far beyond repair. Every hit he absorbed, every step he took, had been grinding the joint into something that would never fully heal. The decision to keep him on the field, he believed, had not been medical. It was financial. The team needed him. Halas needed him. And his health in the eyes of management was a secondary concern. The defining moment of their fracture came after Butkus retired. He discovered documents and testimony that convinced him the franchise had not acted in his best interest. He felt betrayed. Not by football, but by the man whose approval he had chased since childhood. Butkus filed a lawsuit against the Bears, accusing the organization of knowingly allowing him to play while severely injured. It shocked the league. Chicago fans were torn. How could a Bears legend turn against Halas? But the deeper question was more painful. How could Halas allow his greatest warrior to destroy his body for the sake of another losing season? Throughout the ordeal, Halas rarely spoke publicly. He avoided confrontation. Butkus, meanwhile, carried bitterness that lasted decades. Even after settling the dispute, he struggled to erase the feeling that the man he revered had sacrificed him to protect a myth. The myth of Chicago toughness. The myth of the Bears as a family. The myth Halas himself had created. Their story is not one of hatred. It is one of disillusion. Butkus learned that loyalty in football is not a two-way street. He learned that legends are celebrated, but not always protected. And the wound remained open long after the cheers faded. Dick Butkus feared no opponent on the field, but the betrayal he felt from George Halas followed him longer than any injury ever could. Number 1 was the rivalry that defined Dick Butkus more than any other. It was not a feud built on resentment, nor on years of collisions, nor even on betrayal. It was built on something far more personal. The one opponent who haunted him, enraged him, and shaped the brutality of his legend was a man whose name still sparks arguments among old fans, Merlin Olsen, the gentle giant of the Los Angeles Rams, the immovable wall who refused to yield even an inch. To the public, Olsen was calm, soft-spoken, and almost scholarly. To Butkus, he was the one man who pushed him to question whether domination was enough. Their rivalry began in silence. Chicago faced the Rams in a season that demanded toughness from both teams. Butkus arrived with his usual swagger, prepared to dismantle anything that crossed the middle. But opposite him stood Olsen, towering, composed, and infuriatingly controlled. Where other linemen barked and shoved, Olsen simply dug his feet into the turf and absorbed impact with the patience of a stone. Butkus hated it. He thrived on fear. Olsen gave him none. Their early collisions were textbook, clean, powerful, unyielding, but beneath the neat veneer boiled a tension neither man admitted. Butkus wanted dominance. Olsen wanted respect. And every time they collided, the message was the same. Neither of them would get what they wanted easily. The spark came in a game that quickly turned violent. Chicago's offense struggled. The defense spent long stretches on the field, exhausted. During a key play, Butkus read the run and attacked the gap. Olsen met him with a block so perfect, so brutally timed, that Butkus was driven backward. It was one of the rare moments his momentum broke. The crowd gasped. Teammates muttered. Butkus rose, slowly, humiliated in a way statistics would never show. From that snap onward, the game transformed. Butkus hunted running backs with rage. He tore through blocks with reckless abandon. And every time he reached the line, Olsen was waiting. Their collisions became louder, their stares colder. Referees told both teams to calm the line of scrimmage. Neither listened. Their defining moment came in a game soaked in winter mud. A Rams back burst toward the middle. Butkus shot the gap, certain he had a clean hit. At the last second, Olsen slid into position and sealed the lane. Butkus slammed into him so hard that both men crashed into the muck. Cameras caught the scene clearly. Butkus, furious, grabbed Olsen's jersey to pull himself upright. Olsen placed a hand on his chest and pushed him back into the mud. A quiet gesture. A devastating insult. It became the photograph printed in newspapers across the country. The unstoppable force toppled by the immovable object. For Butkus, that moment carved itself into memory. To be humbled even for a moment by someone who remained calm and disciplined felt like a stain he could not scrub away. He targeted Olsen harder in every meeting that followed. Late hits, swipes under the pile, a level of aggression usually reserved for players he genuinely despised. Olsen, in return, never lost his composure. And perhaps that composure enraged Butkus more than any blow he ever received. Their rivalry defined the era. It was the perfect contrast. Rage against restraint, fury against control, Chicago's storm against Los Angeles' stone. And long after both men retired, fans still debated which one truly won. Merlin Olsen was the one opponent Butkus never overcame emotionally. Not because Olsen hurt him, but because he refused to play the game on Butkus's terms. That quiet defiance became the shadow Butkus carried into his final years. There was one more figure who lingered in Dick Butkus's memory. Not a rival, not an enemy, not even someone who shared the same position, but someone whose presence reshaped the way the league viewed toughness during Butkus's era. The bonus name is Deacon Jones, the man who coined the term sack and terrorized quarterbacks with a fury that mirrored Butkus's own chaos. Their paths crossed only a handful of times, yet the impact stayed with Butkus for decades. Deacon Jones represented a different kind of violence. Where Butkus hunted the middle with bone-shattering tackles, Jones attacked the edges with a speed and brutality that bordered on artistic. His signature move, the head slap, was so devastating it left opponents dizzy and disoriented. Even Butkus, who prided himself on playing through anything, admitted privately that Jones was the only defensive player who made him reconsider a blocking scheme. Their most memorable moment came on a stunt designed by the Rams. Jones looped inside, slipping past Chicago's guard. Butkus stepped up to meet him. The collision was short, sharp, and jarring. Jones did not fall back. Instead, he delivered a forearm that caught Butkus square in the chest. The linebacker stumbled for a single step. It was enough. For a man built on intimidation, that moment of imbalance left a mark no camera ever captured. After the game, Jones approached him with a grin and said he loved watching him play. Butkus responded with a nod. It was the closest he ever came to admitting admiration for someone who matched his ferocity. Deacon Jones was the quiet reminder that even the most feared linebacker of his era was not alone in carrying the burden of violence. And in a career defined by collisions, Jones was the rare opponent Butkus respected purely for the chaos he brought to the field. As Dick Butkus moved further from the game, the violence that once defined him began to reveal its true cost. The roars that shook Chicago Stadium softened into distant echoes. The collisions that once left crowds breathless became memories replayed on grainy film. Yet the truth he carried into his final years was simple. His legend was not built solely on the plays he made. It was built on the battles that shaped him, wounded him, and ultimately revealed the limits of what one man could endure. Looking back, the pattern was clear. Ray Nitschke represented the first mirror. A rival who forced Butkus to confront the idea that fear alone was not enough to break another warrior. Their collisions turned Sundays into statements about identity. Larry Sonka exposed the other side of that struggle. He met Butkus head-on with a stubborn will that turned pain into a shared language. Every yard became a question. Who would yield first? Each man refused to answer. Joe Cap pushed the dynamic further. He shattered the unspoken rules. Quarterbacks were supposed to slide. Cap crashed into defenders with reckless purpose. To Butkus, it felt like defiance, a rejection of hierarchy, a challenge to everything the linebacker believed about dominance. Those moments forced him to reckon with the truth that not every opponent could be intimidated, no matter how brutal the hit. George Halas represented a different wound. The betrayal behind the scenes cut deeper than anything that happened on the field. For Butkus, loyalty was the currency of football. Loyalty between teammates. Loyalty between a city and its hero. Loyalty between a franchise and the man who sacrificed his body to uphold its identity. When that loyalty cracked, the disillusionment followed him for decades. His battle with Halas was never physical. It was psychological. A reminder that the game he loved could take far more than it gave. But the deepest shadow came from Merlin Olsen. Their rivalry was not defined by hatred, but by the uncomfortable truth that someone could match him without sharing his anger. Olsen fought with discipline rather than fury, control rather than chaos. And for Butkus, that difference exposed an insecurity he rarely showed. It forced him to confront the possibility that his greatest weapon, the rage he unleashed on every snap, was not the only path to greatness. Olsen's quiet defiance lingered long after their final collision. These 5 truths formed the spine of Butkus's journey. They revealed a man shaped as much by the opponents who resisted him as by the fans who celebrated him. The collisions he delivered were only half the story. The collisions he absorbed physically and emotionally carved the other half. By the time he reached his late years, Butkus had become a symbol of an era the league no longer recognized. The rules changed. The sport softened its edges. The violence he embodied became a relic rather than a blueprint. Yet, whenever his name surfaced, it carried the weight of football's most unforgiving chapter. In interviews, he hinted at regret, but never fully embraced it. He spoke proudly of his time with Chicago, but rarely of the pain that followed. He acknowledged the brutality of the sport, but he did not apologize for it. His identity was bound to those collisions. Without them, he feared he would vanish into anonymity. With them, he became immortal, though the price was steep. As he approached the end of his life in 2023, the reflection sharpened. He understood that his reputation as the most feared linebacker in history existed because he played a game that demanded more from him than it offered in return. His knees failed him. His back stiffened. His body reminded him daily of the legacy he built. Yet the memories he revisited most were not the hits, but the moments that defined the truths he never escaped. Nitschke's defiance, Csonka's stubborn grin, Cap's reckless charge, Halas's betrayal, Olsen's quiet strength, 5 shadows that followed him into old age, and beneath all that the greatest truth remained. Dick Butkus did not set out to become a symbol of violence. He became one because Chicago needed him to be, because football rewarded him for it, because his opponents demanded he rise to their level, and because the only way he knew to survive was to strike first, strike hardest, and never reveal the doubt behind his eyes. His story was never just about fear. It was about what happens when a man becomes the embodiment of a city's rage, and about the cost of carrying that burden long after the stadium lights fade. Dick Butkus carried a legacy carved from collisions, rivalries, and truths he rarely shared. Now that the full story stands before you, one question remains. Which moment revealed the real man behind the myth? Was it the afternoons when Ray Nitschke matched his fury stride for stride? Was it the brutal standoffs with Larry Csonka in the heart of the line? Was it Joe Cap refusing to slide, refusing to break, refusing to be intimidated? Or was it the quiet betrayal from George Halas that cut deeper than any tackle? Perhaps it was the silent strength of Merlin Olsen, the one opponent who humbled him without throwing a single punch. These truths shaped the legend that defined Chicago for an entire generation. They exposed the weight Butkus carried long after the cheering stopped. And they revealed how the darkest battles often happen far from the cameras, in the spaces where pride, pain, and loyalty collide. So now it is your turn. Which of these hidden truths changed the way you see him? Which rivalry shocked you the most? Do you believe the violence of his era created legends or destroyed them? Did Butkus choose that path, or was he shaped by a game that rewarded destruction more than survival? If you felt the impact of this story, if you want to keep uncovering the untold depths behind football's most iconic figures, then stay with us. Subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths for more journeys into the rivalries, betrayals, and dark truths that shaped the golden age of the sport. New stories arrive every week, each peeling back another layer of the men who built football with bone grit and sacrifice. The deeper we look, the more the truth demands to be told.